I saw another pastor this morning, and the thing that was on my heart to say to him was, it's a good day to worship the Lord God. It is a good day to worship today. It's a good day to get with the saints, and it has nothing to do with anything circumstantial. It's just always a good day when we can come together as followers of Christ to worship him together. If I haven't had the chance to meet you, I go by Ant. I get the privilege of serving here as a pastor at Midtown 2-Notch. If you're a guest, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for worshiping with us. And if you're joining us online, thank you so much for participating with us, even online, as we continue in our sermon series called The Suffering Servant. We'll be in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 28. I'd love to have a catchy intro for you, but I got so much to say, we're just going to jump right into it. Luke chapter 10, 25 through 28 begins reading, "And behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test," so that's referring to Jesus, "saying, 'Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?' And he said to him, 'What is written in the law? How do you read it?'" So Jesus is teaching, and this lawyer stands up, potentially interrupting Jesus while he is teaching. And he asks Jesus the question, "How do I get this eternal life?" And Jesus asked him, "Well, what does the law say about it?" He's a lawyer. He would have been familiar with Old Testament law. And this guy does a very good job of boiling down the Old Testament law into two things that the Old Testament is calling us to. Verse 27. "And he answered, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself.'" So he's saying, first of all, love God with everything that you have, every part of you, your heart, your soul, your mind, your physical strength. Love God with everything that you have. And then he says, love your neighbor as yourself. He says to love people. That the same way we look out and tend to our own needs and our own cares and our own interests, we are to do the same thing for others. We are to care for others the same way that we care for ourselves. Verse 28. "And he said to him," this is Jesus talking back to the lawyer, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." Jesus looks at him and is like, "My guy, you got it right." It's important to note, I think, though, that this man is not asking Jesus this question or even answering Jesus' questions because he wants to grow in following God. That's not why he's asking the question. So far, Luke has been very clear as to why this man is asking Jesus questions, why this man is responding to Jesus. He's asking Jesus this question for the distinct purpose, it said earlier, of putting Jesus to the test. That's how Luke starts off the passage, that this man asked Jesus these questions to put him to the test. See, when it comes to the scriptures, this man's interpretation was right, but his motivation was wrong. His interpretation was right. He answered Jesus' question correctly. He summed up the law into two things: love God and love people. His understanding, his interpretation, his Bible study skills were right. But his motivation was wrong. And Luke points this out again in verse 29. He says, "But he, desiring to justify himself." This is the second time that Luke is letting us know what this man is really after, and it's not after following God. He says, desiring to justify himself. So he's about to ask Jesus another question, and we see his motives here. He said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Who is my neighbor, Jesus? Who do I need to be loving the way that I love myself? Which at the surface seems like a very appropriate question. He says, love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love my neighbor as myself. And so he says, well, who do I consider my neighbor that I need to be loving the way that I love myself? And because Luke told us his motivation, we know that his question was likely more so, which people do I need to love so that I can be seen and declared as righteous? Spell out for me the people, Jesus, exactly that I need to be loving this way so that I can be seen as righteous, which is a very different question from who has God put around me that I can truly and deeply love? Those are two very different questions. One is more about, I'm trying to get this checklist right, Jesus, of everything that I'm supposed to be doing. So tell me who the ones that I need to be loving the way that I love myself. Because he was wanting to justify himself. He was wanting to be seen as righteous, maybe in his own eyes, maybe in the eyes of others, maybe in the eyes of God. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to follow God and practice righteousness and holiness. But that's not the same as truly loving people. But that's not the same, or I should say, seeking to justify ourselves isn't the same as truly loving someone. If this guy's heart was in the right place, I believe verse 29 would have read something like this. Desiring to grow in his love for God and people, he asked, Jesus, how do I grow in loving my neighbor more? How do I grow in loving God more? How do I love people more and better than I do now? This is what he should have been asking. But this man just wants to check a box so that he or maybe others can see himself as righteous. He's not actually trying to love people the way he loves himself. And a way that we might do something similar to this is if we were to ask, well, who all do I need to serve so that I can be considered a good Christian? Who is my neighbor? Who do I need to love so that I can be considered as a good Christian? How many Bible verses do I need to be able to quote to be seen as a good Christian? See, our knowledge can be on point even while our heart is off. See, this man, his mind was in a place of understanding, but his heart was actually in a place of selfishness. He wasn't actually concerned with loving people. He was concerned with how he was being seen. He was concerned with whether or not he was seen or declared to be righteous. Again, his interpretation is right, but his motivation is wrong. His intellect is right, but his intentions are off. He knows he's supposed to love, but he obviously hasn't truly grasped what love is because he doesn't want to do good things for people because he genuinely cares for them. He wants to do good things for people because doing good things for people will likely make him feel better about himself. And his back and forth with Jesus isn't an expression of him loving God and loving people. It's an expression of him loving himself and using people to justify himself. It's a very troubling and concerning thing to me how often we are more motivated by our desire to be seen as a good Christian than we are motivated by our love for God and love for people. I've gotten nervous sometimes in conversations with Christians where I hear things like, yeah, I'm really trying to be a good Christian, but I keep messing up. And there's nothing wrong per se with wanting to be a good Christian, depending on what you mean by that. And I believe there are some people who say that, and what they really mean is I want to grow my love for God and my affection for God and my love for people. So I definitely have a category for that. But I also, sometimes I believe that deep in that, what we're actually after is trying to justify ourselves. That there's a certain standard of Christianity, some amount of works that I need to do. And if I do these things enough, if I do them to a certain degree, if I meet my own expectations or maybe meet the expectations that others have for me as a Christian, then I feel okay. Then I feel okay about myself. So it's this ambiguous, vague, moving target of whatever level of Christian maturity I expect myself to be at, or maybe others expect me to be. And I'm actually trying to do that as a means of trying to justify myself. My wife and children who live for me, they don't just desire for me to do things on a checklist of being a good dad or a good husband. They want me to truly love them. They want me to truly care for them. They don't want me to just use different acts of being a husband and being a father to just check off some list to say, hey, I did my fatherly and husbandly duties today. They desire for me to actually love them, to truly care about them. The good news, what I love about this parable that Jesus is teaching, Jesus is so wise and kind and merciful to this lawyer who's trying to test Jesus, who's trying to justify himself, that he is going to respond to this man's questions with a parable that, one, answers the question he asked, and then two, answers the question he should have asked. And the way he does it is absolutely beautiful, and I think it's genius. This parable is going to lead us away from trying to love people to justify ourselves and actually lead us towards love and compassion towards others. It's the parable of the Good Samaritan. Let's start it in verse 30. Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Since Jesus is talking to Jews at this time, this person leaving Jerusalem, going down to Jericho, is likely someone that those listening to him would have identified with in the story. Jesus doesn't say the man was a Jew, but this is likely who they would have identified with in the story. Now, the road from Jerusalem to Jericho is steep and dangerous. Jerusalem at that time sits at about 3,000 feet above sea level, while Jericho, even though it was only 17 miles away, was 1,000 feet below sea level. So the road from Jerusalem to Jericho was one where you're descending very steeply. There's a lot of caves that were there, a lot of places that people would be able to hide. Oftentimes it was very dark. It was a place that many robbers would often hang out so that they can attack someone and rob them, which is exactly what happens to this man. Many people actually refer to this road from Jerusalem to Jericho as the bloody way. They referred to it as the bloody way. It would have been much like walking down somewhere that was dark and a dangerous part of the city, except this place would have been miles away from any type of lights that would have made it more difficult for someone to rob you. So many people would have fallen victim to thieves and robbers on this road. And Jesus' audience would have known this. They would have known that this would have been a dangerous place for someone to be walking, particularly by themselves. So this man is beaten nearly to the point of death. His possessions are taken, his clothes are taken, and he's left there to die. Verse 31. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. So you have this priest and the Levite, these people who have been workers for the good of people. They were public servants, if you would. Each of them passed on the other side from the man, not wanting to get involved and tend to the man that was there. Now, I don't want us to be too quick to judge the priest and the Levite, because again, they would have known that this would have been a very dangerous place. Potentially, maybe they thought that the man could potentially have been dead, and some of the Levitical rules for them would have been that if they would have touched a dead body in any way, they would have been ceremonially unclean, meaning a lot of the rituals and a lot of their job would have been, potentially they wouldn't have been able to participate in them for the next week because of having touched a dead body. So maybe there are some legitimate reasons that they would not have helped the man. But the irony still is that the priests and the Levites were actually the very officers of God's people who were charged with helping the needy. Many would say priests were like public health officials along with other duties. Levites were distributing oftentimes alms to the poor. Yet these two put their schedules full of the ceremonies and other valid religious duties over trying to help this man. But I don't think that what these men do is the primary point of this parable. What these men don't do, I don't believe that to be the primary point of the parable. I think the point is what the man does next that we see in verse 33. Jesus says, but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. When he saw him, he had compassion. This is important. This is what the lawyer did not have. The lawyer was not moved by compassion. The lawyer was moved by a desire to justify himself. Now, Jesus gives us this parable of someone who comes in and has compassion. Compassion is when the hurting of someone else hurts you. It's when you're pained by the pain of another. It's an aspect of love that moves you to be with and care for those when you see them in pain. And we see this play out as we see how the Samaritan responded to the man's suffering, how the Samaritan responded to this man's need. He goes on to help this man because it hurts him to see this man in this condition. He's not trying to justify himself. He sees this man in this difficult situation, in this pain. This man is in need, and he moves to help him. Verse 34. This is what he does. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. Samaritans at this time were sworn enemies of the Jewish people. Sworn enemies. I was trying to do a little research as to trying to figure out why that was the case. And one thing I saw in 3 separate places is that it's believed that at some point some Jews had damaged or defaced maybe one of the temples that the Samaritans were going to worship. And then some Samaritans retaliated by putting dead men's bones inside of the Jewish temple to defile it so people couldn't go in there to worship. There was a lot of, it wasn't just tension. There was animosity, there was hostility between the two, between Jews and Samaritans. And Jesus, I believe, is being intentional about making the man who comes in and saves this person that is hurting by making them and referring to this person as a Samaritan. Many would say that it would have been more culturally practiced for this Samaritan to step on the Jew instead of helping him. But instead of stepping on him, instead of kicking him, even though this man would have been seen as an enemy, he simply shows compassion. And this compassion takes the shape of this form of friendship and advocacy for this man. To give you a point of reference of how shocking this might have been for Jesus to say that the hero in this story is a Samaritan as he's talking to a Jewish audience, it's almost like, so picture Jesus teaching or speaking at a Black Lives Matter movement. And the reason I'm going political is this would have been a very political thing that Jesus did. Imagine Jesus speaking at a Black Lives Matter convention or something like that and tells a story about a man who ends up getting hurt, ends up getting robbed, and he's half dead. And then he comes in and says, and the guy who saves him has on a MAGA hat and a shirt that says, all lives matter. This is like what Jesus is doing. Or vice versa. Maybe someone who is at a rally, a Make America Great Again rally, and then the person who is hurting, who is in need, is saved by someone that has a Black Lives Matter shirt on. He's being intentional right now. Jesus knows what he's doing. He's being intentional. He's making the person that they saw as an enemy, the person that they would see as not like them, coming in and saving the person that they are identifying with. This is a shocking way for Jesus to tell this story. And this enemy comes in. He sees this man suffering in a dangerous place. He pours out what he has. He puts his oil and his wine on the man. Wine would have been an antiseptic, and the oil was believed to speed up the healing process. He puts bandages on this man, probably getting this man's blood on him, on his skin, likely getting this man's blood on his clothes. He puts this man on his animal. This man probably wasn't able to get himself up there on his own. So he's probably lifting this man. This is the image that Jesus is creating. He's probably lifting this man who's beaten half dead onto his animal, and he takes care of him at the end. Verse 35. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. A denarii was about a day's wage. So about the amount of money you could make working a day, that was about a denarii. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. Gives the innkeeper 2 days' wages, says, whatever else is necessary for you to take care of him, go ahead and do that. I'll reimburse you when I get back. So he gives this man the ministry of his presence by going to this man. He gives this man the ministry of this physical protection. He gives him emergency medical treatment. He gives him transportation. He provides significant financial assistance. And he promises to cover whatever is necessary for this man to be tended to until he is well. He risks his own safety. He changes his schedule. He becomes likely bloody and dirty through his personal involvement. He even puts himself on the hook for this man to be taken care of. He puts himself in harm's way for the man. And then Jesus, after telling this story that would have been shocking to them, he's unwilling to let them hear this story and not know exactly what he's telling them to do. So in verse 36, he says, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And he said, the one who showed him mercy. Many believe that this man was unwilling to say that it was a Samaritan, so he just said the one who showed him mercy. He said, the one who showed him mercy, and Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. You go and do likewise. One of the things that I love about Jesus doing it that way is because that Samaritan isn't doing that to justify himself. Why? Because his people would have said, leave that man alone. Because the people who he likely would have cared how they felt about him and what they thought about him, they would have said, leave that man there by himself. Don't help him. This man is not doing it to justify himself. This man is doing it because he has compassion. There is compassion in his heart that is moving him to serve others. And it is a risky compassion that he has. It's one thing to be so moved that when you see someone else hurting that you're willing to sacrifice your time, your money, your energy. It's a whole different thing when someone is hurt and you're willing to risk potentially your own personal safety to help them. That's what this man does. When you're willing to suffer the same hurt that they have because of your love for them, because your love for them causes you to feel pain when you see them in pain. That's what this man was willing to do. This is the kind of compassion and love that values the needs of others more than we even value our own feelings of security and safety. This is what it looks like to love someone as you love yourself, to care about someone else the same way you care about yourself. We often don't want to show compassion when it causes us to sacrifice our routines and our schedules. But Jesus says to love your neighbor as yourself is to be willing to put even in some cases, I should say, your state of well-being at risk to help others possess the level of well-being that you have. And again, Jesus doesn't tell this nice story and leave it open-ended so they can decide how they can apply it on their own. No, he concludes this story by giving a simple instruction to each of us. Go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. This is an all-out assault on any amount of complacency of comfortable religious people who protect themselves from the needs of others. Because y'all know how it is when someone is in need. Even if you're not putting yourself in a place of physical risk, it is a difficult thing, oftentimes a messy thing to hurt those who are in need. And oftentimes we'd rather just stay at arm's length. Maybe the Levite, maybe the priest, they pass by and they try to forget what they saw. They try to forget the pain that they saw in this man. So I was looking at this. I thought there were 3 demands of compassion that I felt like we can glean, from this story. One is being willing to sacrifice your comfort. Being moved by compassion usually isn't comfortable. It is the act of stepping into the pain of others. It's a willingness to let someone else's hurt to hurt you. It might make you uncomfortable because of what it requires of you. But if we're going to go and do likewise, as Jesus said, we ought to be willing to sacrifice our own comfort. Compassion demands also that we be flexible with our schedules, that we hold our schedules and our plans with an open hand up to God. God, if you desire to change my plans today, God, if there's a way that you desire for me to show love to others today that is different from what I had already planned, God, make that known to me. Help me to see that. Help me be aware to what your Spirit is leading me towards. If we're going to go and do likewise, we need to be willing to sometimes care more about people than we care about our plans and our schedules. A third demand of compassion that we see here is that we should not just be compassionate to the people that we like. Y'all see that in this story, right? That we're not just called to love the people that we like or the people that we don't have any negative feelings towards, but that we'll be willing to show compassion to all when we see them hurting. This might look different for each of us from time to time. But to be able to show compassion to all people is maybe the person that God is calling you to show compassion to is the person at your job that doesn't like you. And to be honest, I know you're a Christian, but you don't really like them either. You don't really like them that way either. Maybe it's not someone at your job. Maybe it's someone at your school. Maybe it's an acquaintance. Maybe it's a neighbor that you have. How can they be playing music this late? It's too loud and doesn't make sense. To go and do likewise means to show compassion and meet the needs of people that oftentimes we don't care for, that we wouldn't choose to be around. But what part of what Jesus, I believe, is saying to this lawyer is we don't get to choose who we show love to. That you don't just get to set a nice fence around the number of people that I can consider my neighbor. And as long as I'm loving these people well that fit the description of a neighbor that I like, then I'm doing what I'm called to do. If we're going to go and do likewise, we need to not discriminate with our love. And Jesus is saying that this level of love and compassion is to be extended by the people of God to all, to everyone. And it is a picture of his love that is extended to all, that he loves all whom he has created in his image. So how do we grow in compassion? I think that's an extremely important question. Here's why. I don't believe compassion to be something that you can just muster up the willpower to have more compassion. I don't think it's something that you can decide today, you know what, I'm going to have more compassion, and then you start hurting more when you see other people hurting. I don't think it works that way. I don't think this is something you can just try harder and just pull it off. I don't think that's how this works. How do we grow in compassion? Thankfully, Jesus gives us some insight into how to grow towards compassion instead of just trying to do things and do certain acts of love to justify ourselves. I want to share with you about a man I met in Philadelphia a few weeks ago to illustrate this. We were visiting with a nonprofit organization, I believe it's called The Point, where they serve about 400 kids a year. Students that 90+% of them probably are considered high-risk students, if you know what I mean when I say that. They serve them in a variety of ways. They serve them via health and nutrition. They serve them with sports and recreation like boxing, basketball, skating, and so many others. They have a whole music studio for students in the area that like to make music, and they teach them to play instruments. They have video game tournaments. They have many things, and they have Bible study. as well. And the man that's the executive director, for this ministry, his name is Dwayne. And we got to meet with Dwayne and hear a bit about his story and about what's going on with him and what led him to the place that he currently is in, serving there and not just with this nonprofit, but he has had success in many other areas. And so Dwayne starts to tell us a little bit about his background. He grew up in an extremely traumatic background. And I don't use the word traumatic very lightly, an extremely traumatic background with a lot of poverty, seeing a lot of things that no one at that age should ever have to see. And he said he was at a point where he was very close to putting himself in some maybe dangerous situations, or maybe ending up in jail or prison for a very long time. But as he's telling the story of why he didn't go down that path, he talks primarily about two entities, two parties that helped him. One was a man that he called Willie. He said, man, Willie just was like, hey, you and your friend, y'all hang out with me. And he ended up mentoring them. He told him a lot of things. Willie told me a lot of things I didn't want to hear. He said he challenged me, he encouraged me, he helped make me into the man that I am today. Willie is a Christian. I'm not sure if he was a pastor or not, but he definitely was pointing him to Christ over and over again and challenging him very hard and just loving on him and encouraging him. He said that was very important for him. He said he also got involved in this, he called it an older, very small church. He said, well, there were these older women in the church who would just take him and his friend by the hand and just pray for them and pray for them and pray for them. And Sunday after Sunday, they would pray for them and invite them. They would invite him and Dwayne and his friend, into their homes and care for them. He said, these women taught me how to pray. He said, these women changed my life. They showed me on a day in and day out basis what it looked like to follow Jesus. And as Dwayne was sharing a lot of what they're going for in the nonprofit and the ministry that he leads, one of the things that he was sure to point out is that our model for caring for these kids is getting Christians from the community, Christians in the churches that are around here, and having them come and serve the children. So when we're doing something from basketball, we're trying to call the church and say, hey, do you have anybody that can come and serve and help us with this basketball camp or this basketball league that we're doing? Or do you have somebody that can come and lead in the Bible studies that we'll be having and talk to the children about Jesus? Because one of the things I just started making this connection instantly, like, oh, you're trying to provide for these children. I said to him, you're trying to provide for these children exactly what you got. He said, yes, because when I look at them, I see myself. That's a key to compassion right there. He said, because when I look at them, I see me, and I know what I needed when I was in that situation, and Christians came to me and they loved on me and they cared for me and they challenged me and they told me about Jesus and they pointed me in the right direction, and I wouldn't be where I am right now if they had not done that for me. So now he's leading an organization with such passion and with such strong leadership because he has compassion. He's providing for the children what was provided for him that helped him tremendously. His compassion for them is stirred up and is set on fire by the fact that when he sees them, he sees himself in them. Believe it or not, I believe that's exactly what Jesus is doing with this parable. He is very intentional about who he wants his audience to identify with. His audience hated the Samaritans. He knows that they wouldn't have identified with the Samaritan. He wanted them to identify with the man that was half dead, with the man that was robbed, that was needing someone else to come and help them. It's like he's saying, imagine if you were hopeless and completely helpless to save yourself. Imagine if someone you didn't know came to you and was willing to sacrifice themselves for your comfort and willing to adjust their schedule to meet your need. And they were willing to show compassion to you, even though you were against them. Imagine if they came and ministered to you with their presence and poured out what they had to help you and came to a dangerous place just to bless you. And they were willing to get bloody because they were willing to do whatever it took to save you. And they were willing to pay the price that was necessary for you to be healed and to be taken care of. And then what if after making that payment for you, they said, I'll be back to pay the rest, whatever the cost will be. He's talking to them in Luke chapter 10 and trying to get them to see themselves as someone who was in need and was blessed by someone that was willing to do that for them. And then just a handful of chapters later, he goes and gets on the cross. A handful of chapters later, he goes and gets on the cross, dying for the sins of people who are hopeless and helpless to save themselves. And he sacrifices his comforts for our comforts. And he comes to a dangerous place to bless us with his presence. And he wasn't just adjusting his schedule. He made his schedule around us since before time began, that he will come and save and rescue us. And he shows compassion to us, even though we were against him. And he doesn't pour out oil and wine, but he pours out his very blood, because he too gets bloody in his saving of us. And he pays the price that was necessary, fulfilling the prophecy from Isaiah 53, verse 5 that says, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we were healed. Or maybe you grew up reading the King James Version like I did, where it says, and by his stripes, we were healed. And then he says, I'm going to pay the penalty right now, but don't worry, I'll come back to finish the job as well. As Christians, Jesus has given us exactly what we need to grow in compassion. He gives us the ability to see ourselves in everyone that is hurting, everyone that is struggling, everyone that is hopeless, everyone that is desperate, everyone that is in need, because now we know, seeing Jesus on the cross, that that's who we are spiritually outside of him. When he gets on the cross, he shows us that we are a lot like the person that is on the side of the road, that is in need of someone that's not like us to come and save us and come and rescue us. He gives us what we need to be able to grow in compassion. He doesn't just tell us to grow in compassion. No, he shows us you actually have a lot in common with those that are in need. He helps us to see ourselves in those that are in need. So if you're a Christian, regardless of your background, regardless of your economic status, regardless of your education level, regardless of your success level in this life, you know what it is to be in need. You know what it is to be blessed by someone who was willing to sacrifice their comfort and their time to serve you in your time of need. So let's allow that to birth compassion within us. Let's allow that to cause compassion to burn as a flame inside of our hearts. Family, there's a website that I want to put on the screen for you. It's midtowncolumbia.com/serve-the-city. You might want to write this one down. Here's the reason why. I talked to one of the pastors at our downtown church. He oversees our Serve the City partnerships. If you were with us, I think it was a couple weeks ago, or really just a weekend ago, when we had our Serve the City weekend, where we partnered with different organizations within the city that are serving those who are in need, serving those who are in vulnerable positions within our city. And as I was talking to Alan about this, he says, well, here's what we do with our Serve the City partnerships. About twice a year, we have these big events that we make public. We'll put them on the website for each of our Serve the City partners, and there's 7 of them. And he says, and that we make that public, and anyone who wants to come, you can come and sign up. And when it fills up, it fills up. But we try to make sure that those are available on the website. He said that's level 1 of how someone can get involved with our Serve the City partners. You keep your eye on the website. We'll try to make announcements here on Sundays as well. He said there's also another level of a way you can do it. He said, if you go to this website, midtowncolumbia.com/serve-the-city, you can click on and learn a little bit about each of the Serve the City partnerships that we have. And it also has a way for you can reach out to our director, which is our liaison between our family of churches and with the different Serve the City partners that we have. And you can just email them and let them know, like, hey, if anything else comes up available, let me know. And I would love to serve. And he says what they do is they have a list of people who have reached out and said they want to know if anything else is available, another way to serve. And oftentimes, whether it's through text messages or group me or whatever it is, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of needs that come up that don't necessarily go public on the website, but that you can be aware of, where you can go and serve those in our city who are in need. Oftentimes in a way that people won't know about. Oftentimes in a way that won't justify you before man. Oftentimes in a way that won't get you an applause, won't get you a hand clap, won't get people talking about how good of a Christian you are. But it's exactly what those who possess compassion would want. An opportunity to serve those who are in need. Why do I bring that up? Because the truth is, God didn't call on all of us to start or maybe be the executive director of a nonprofit like Dwayne was. But God has gifted us with compassion. And if you are hearing me now, if you're in the room or if you're joining us online, you are connected with a church that has worked very hard to make connecting with different organizations, different nonprofits within the city that are serving those who are in vulnerable situations available to you. And we work hard to make that sign up as seamless as possible, make it as simple as we possibly can for you to be able to show and demonstrate the same compassion that Christ has shown to us. So the big call for us today is to remain committed to serving with our Serve the City partners throughout the year and throughout the years. Now, I know we just had Serve the City weekend last weekend. I know that was great. I know there were hundreds of people across our family of churches that were serving with our Serve the City partners. I was also talking to Alan, and he's saying we are trying to increase our connection and our involvement with our Serve the City partners throughout the year as well. We do want our family of churches to see this as not just a weekend, but see this as an ongoing practice in the life of our church, that we are a people of compassion because we have been shown compassion by the compassionate one who came to us and because of his compassion laid down his life for us. We have tried to make the process as simple and straightforward as we possibly can, that we might be able to be a people that shows the compassion of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, as we see ourselves in all that are in need. Maybe that's actually the call today. That we would grow in seeing ourselves in others who are in need. And that we would remember how blessed we have been that our compassionate Savior will come and give his life for us. Let's go continue to partner with our Serve the City partners and serve those who are in need together. Family, will you pray with me?